So for our next segment, we are talking about Iran. And unlike what's usually the case when we talk about foreign countries, it is not a segment called "Sorry We Fucked Up Your Country."
Yeah, we actually already did that on Iran.
Yeah, we already fucked up Iran. This is, I guess, if, like, to some degree, we're probably responsible for the Iran of today, and so to some degree, sorry we.
To some degree.
Contributed.
To some degree.
Yeah, all right. Fair enough. We fucked up their country, and this is pretty much a direct fallout of that having happened.
Yeah. So very, very quickly, just a little bit of a previously on the spectrum. So to sum it up in really, really quick...
In bigly terms.
Bigly. So Iran elected a populist dude that wanted to nationalize Iranian oil.
Back in the day.
United States said, no, fuck you, don't care about democracy, deposed him, and installed the Shah. Shah got deposed, and a theocratic government came in his place. And since the 70s, that government has been what has been ruling Iran. And they, of course, hate Americans, and they are a theocratic government that brutally suppress dissent, brutally suppress women, have a fucking morality police that goes around and makes sure that people are following the tenets of Islam and following the Islamic dress codes around the country. And,
yeah,
all caught up.
That is a good history. So a little bit of history on like some of the stuff that it's directly led to this. So Iran officially enshrined mandates for head coverings for women in 1983. Why we're talking about that will be clear in a moment if you haven't, kept abreast of what's happening in Iran. 4 years after the revolution, that brought like that current government to power. So over the years since that mandate in the 80s, levels of enforcement have ebbed and flowed. There was like a more moderate president recently, President Hassan Rouhani. He served between 2013 and 2021 and had fewer like patrols of the streets, ultimately, more moderate, less, active morality police. This is all relative, we should point out, because they still had them. It was still like, a authoritarian regime. But like, overall, like less enforcement of these policies. Since then, enforcement has ramped up under Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. And so that kind of brings us to the middle of September. So on September 16th, a 22-year-old woman named Mahsa Amini was killed while in police custody, right? So the police, who in this case were the morality police, Iran's guidance patrol, claimed that she died of a heart attack, something that her family denies. This heart attack occurred after she fell into a coma. She did die in the hospital, so they did bring her to the hospital. Dying of a heart attack, at least the way I'm thinking of it, in this case, you've got a 22-year-old woman. Yeah. She was in police custody for like 3 days after being attainted for allegedly violating like this conservative dress code that requires that you wear a hijab or a headscarf
in a specific way. It wasn't even that she wasn't wearing it. It was that she was wearing it wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or incorrectly.
And so she was picked up by the morality police and brought to a re-education center for women who violate the dress code. So the idea in my mind that the morality police swept someone up, detained them for 3 days at a re-education center, there's some indication in released video footage that she may have been beaten, although an official autopsy claims that there's no internal bleeding or brain hemorrhage.
Yeah, but the idea do we believe the official autopsy by the bury people? Like there have been cases in which there have been some protesters, some young women protesters who have been murdered by the police.
Yeah.
During this protest, in front of the families of these young women, and the police have specifically tried to instruct the parents, oh, just say it was natural causes, or say it was this, or say it was that, or say it was whatever, and that the parents have been like, oh yeah, no, we're not gonna fucking do that, and then have gone into the streets and gone to various human rights groups and said, yeah, so my daughter got killed by these motherfuckers, and they told me to pretend that it was a fucking heart attack, or it was like,
Yeah.
you cannot believe anything that they say. These are not reliable sources. These are a bunch of theocratic, authoritarian officers of the regime. Like, you cannot trust any of that shit.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, absolutely. And that like disinformation, misinformation has surrounded Mahsa Amini's death. And honestly, like, the thing is, like, with all this information, no one, to Nathan's point, no one fucking believes this. Like, like saying someone died of a heart attack, like, lots of things can cause a heart attack. Like, that can be the ultimate cause. Like, if you strangle someone, they probably die of a heart attack. But like, that's not the real cause. So this can be technically true. Even if it is true, it can be technically true, but not accurate. And so this death in police custody, most likely at the hands of these morality police, has ignited nationwide demonstrations since the middle of September that have persisted for weeks, and kind of become a rallying cry around a number of issues.
And as it stands, at least 185 people, including 19 minors, have been killed by security forces. And thousands have been arrested by security forces. And that's according to various different human rights groups. There's been a lot of support for the protest, and they've had some really interesting methods. Like, they're really active on social media. And one of my favorite things, there was a government broadcast that got hijacked. Now, it's unclear as to whether or not it was a hack or whether it was like an inside job. It seems like it was an inside job because apparently the broadcast wasn't online. But basically, in the middle of a broadcast, of this government broadcast, there's this report on Ayatollah Ali Khamenei that just randomly got interrupted with this image of Khamenei in crosshairs, and the words, quote, "The blood of our youths is on your hands." It had a photo of Mahsa Amini, and it also had the images of 3 other young women that had been killed during the protest. And there was a card that came up that read, quote, "Join us and rise up." And there was a protest chant that said "Women, Life, Freedom." And then after the screen came back, it just went on an anchorman who was just looking like, fuck, like, what just happened? And again, this happened on the Islamic Republic of Iran Broadcasting, which is basically the propaganda arm of the government. So that's some pretty based shit right there.
That's super serious. Like, the demonstrations have spread throughout all 31 provinces, and are like the largest demonstrations that we've seen in a number of years. So like, the scale of this is pretty impressive. And like, to Nathan's point, like, the tactics are also pretty impressive. And like, you worry about these people because we know security forces are like using live fire. Hundreds of people have been killed. Like, the security forces have been like escalating. They've been using like misinformation. Like, the Ayatollah has been describing like that this is a foreign like led plot, and that's like a a common talking point when you're planning to, or when you want an excuse for escalating violence against people because you claim that they're like influenced by foreign people, including like arresting a bunch of European citizens that were in Iran. And they're like escalating, calling like state rallies have called for perpetrators of violence against security forces to be executed. And the Revolutionary Guard called on Iran's judiciary to prosecute protesters, and Iran's army to put out a statement saying it would confront enemies and plots to ensure security. So like, it's escalating on kind of both sides of this issue, and the death toll, especially among like young people, is just really, really sad.
Yeah. And another thing that's been kind of interesting is that there have actually been some images of security forces joining the protesters.
Interesting.
And a huge part of it is basically the fact that there's not a lot of morale among these security forces, because keep in mind, not only is the government authoritarian, it is incredibly corrupt.
Yeah.
So why would anybody want to like fight or shoot or kill a bunch of unarmed civilians for a government that really could not care less about you? All right. The government is corrupt from in all levels.
Yeah.
All right. So, you know, because of either defections or because of people just straight up deciding this isn't worth it. Also, fears of the idea of this being successful. I mean, if I'm a security force, I might be thinking, I don't want my face to be, on display fighting these protesters, because if it's successful, then it's my ass.
Yeah. So in reading analysis of this situation, it's really interesting to think about how this seems to be a coalescing of like many issues, some of which like really get at kind of some of the foundational theocratic and like problems with like, well, having a theocracy, as well as some of those corruption concerns. So like, they're demanding like justice for Amini, of course, because it was kind of the inciting event, and end to like the mandatory like headscarf wearing. But they're also like protesting about like economic neglect and political abuse and this corruption, and like denouncing kind of clerical rule in general, and chanting like death to the dictator in reference to Supreme Leader Khamenei. And so, it's interesting to see a protest that seems to get at kind of all kind of aspects of what we would describe as like the worst parts of their government. Yeah. Because it's interesting to contrast. I read one analysis contrasting it to protests in 2009, because like large scale protests are not necessarily new, nor is it necessarily new for the government to take violent action against their citizens to stop the protests. And so like usually they end in a lot of violence. But in like 2009, the protests were aimed at like protesting what appeared to be a rigged election in favor of just different kind of representatives of the status quo. Like largely the same people have been in power, kind of rotating in the government since the republic was established. And so like, it's one thing to see protests about, political issues, but as this movement has been increasingly led by young people, like it seems to be like much more like anti-establishment, kind of more radical rejection of like the theocratic government, including coalescing around like these like women issues of like women's equality being like fundamental to lots of the protests, but also just like the fact that as kind of a latch on point can like be a basis for questioning a lot of the problems of their theocratic government in general. And so it seems like much more of a like angry, youth-led, more fundamental kind of protest than we've seen in Iran in the past.
Yeah. Yeah. And I really hope that some of the Christian nationalists in our own country are taking notice, because this is the type of shit that happens in a theocracy.
Yeah.
All right. You end up having an oppressive government that becomes authoritarian, that cracks down on dissenters, and they end up sending out morality police to make sure that their version of their own religious text is being enforced. This is why theocracy is a bad thing. This is why freedom of religion is an important thing. This is why freedom of religion cannot be complete if you don't have a separation of church and state. All right? Yeah. This is the type of theocracy that Christian nationalists are talking about. Now, they might pretend like, oh, no, but that's Islam. All right? A Christian nationalist country, they would never be super sexist. Yeah, the Middle Ages called.
Also, many churches called. I mean, we don't need to get into that, but there are lots of churches that are quite sexist.
Yeah, there are. And there are lots of practices that are still blatantly sexist.
Yeah.
All right? So just...
Equality is not in the Bible.
Yeah.
It's not in there.
Now, again, that doesn't mean that if you're religious, you're automatically bad.
Not at all.
But what it does mean is if you're a theocrat, you're automatically bad.
Yeah, seriously. Seriously.
I agree. You can have religious values, and those religious values can even, to an extent, impact some of your policy beliefs or some of your moral values. I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with that. But as soon as things that are solely associated with your religion enter into that public sphere of policy, you start becoming in danger of following in the example of these various countries that are theocracies. Now, I would like to point out the reason why Iran is a theocracy is our fault. So I don't want to put my nose up and be like, oh, if only Iran was America. As star-spangled awesome as America. No, it's our fault that this is happening in the first place.
Yeah.
All right, I want to be very clear about that. However, we should also take note about the dangers of theocracy. And on top of that, there's another point that I want to make. Hey, CIA, I know you're listening. Stay the fuck out of this.
Oh, man, I think that's a great point. I think that's a really good point. I think, Oh, God, I didn't even think about that. Oh, no. Oh, God. In 20 years, younger versions of us will be doing a sorry, we fucked up your country again.
Yeah,
I really just hope that's not the case.
Hopefully not.
Yeah, so the response from the international community, at least so far, seems like it's been appropriate. Like sanctions against the Iranian government from the U.S., condemnation from international condemnation of Iran is at one of their highest levels in a really long time, which seems like the right thing. At the same time, so while the Iranian government has throttled internet and cellular service and blocked WhatsApp and Instagram, Iranian people have been turning to VPNs. The U.S. Treasury Department said that they will be working to install broadband internet access and cloud sharing technologies in Iran. And I mean, even Elon Musk, God, he shouldn't get involved, except for the fact that he has Starlink, his company, which is a satellite internet provider, which has been doing good work in Ukraine, and hopefully can work with, if that's the best option, can work with the Treasury Department to provide internet for two reasons, right? This is a youth-led movement which has gained a lot of momentum via the internet, right?
Yeah.
They're able to organize to the degree that they are organized, or at least inspire action nationally via the internet. But two, it's also what will be able to hold the government accountable for those human rights abuses.
Yeah. So I completely support peripheral support.
Yeah.
All right.
Agreed.
But the United States needs to not get directly involved, because historically, when the United States gets directly involved in Middle Eastern affairs, when it supports regime change wars, it taints it, because unfortunately, oftentimes when that happens, it is specifically to pursue the interests of the United States.
Yeah.
All right. Either in terms of mineral wealth, in terms of oil, gas, fossil fuels, all of that. And we need to not do that.
Yeah.
All right. If they are able to create a revolution and overthrow the government, then I think that we should lift sanctions and we should establish diplomatic relations that with Iran. I mean, a lot of the sanctions that are currently on Iran, I think, go too far to begin with. But if they do end up having a revolution, we should absolutely be lifting sanctions. But don't get directly involved in this. All right. We tried it once. We fucked everything up. Let's like let them guide their own future for once.
Now, that doesn't mean you shouldn't like be informed.
Yes.
Like share informed opinions. Like talk to your friends, your family about this. Help garner support for the people of Iran. But to your point, Nathan, U.S. government, CIA, if you're listening, we know you are big fans of the show. Please stay the fuck out of this.
Yeah. I just want to end with a quotation from a 17-year-old protester in Iran that talks to Reuters, kept anonymous because of obvious reasons. She said, quote, "Hey world, hear me. I want a revolution. I want to live freely, and I'm ready to die for it. Instead of dying every minute under this regime's repression, I prefer to die with their bullets in protest for freedom.